So during the past few weeks, I've noticed a lot of Solana Treasury companies popping up. If you take a look right over here, you can notice there's 17, including the one that I'm going to talk about today, which is 18 Solana Treasury companies. Even though this is not most up to date, there's about 17 million shares of Solana that they've accumulated, which gives them about almost 3% of the total supply, and they're staking roughly 9.3 million. So if you just go to this Treasury tracker, you can actually see all of them, and I'll link all of my links below. But in today's video, I'm going to be talking about one in particular. I will be covering other ones in the future videos, but in today, I want to focus on Helius, HSDT, because I've noticed that HSDT has been popping up. They have some of the best backers, and in my opinion, I think that they're one of the cleanest treasury companies. So what we're going to do today is we're going to discuss the company's history. Now, if you believe in HSDT, you have to believe in Solana. So we're going to talk briefly about the fundamentals of Solana. I won't go over and hash out all of the technical details because there's a lot of videos for that. So we'll take a look at the fundamentals, and then we'll look at HSDT, its value, the investors behind it, and then finally give you a price prediction, or at least where I think the market is going to go. My name is Colin. For those of you who are new around here, what I do is I do fundamental analysis on stocks, on crypto projects that I really like, that I believe have long-term value. Now, before we jump into it, remember that none of this is financial or investment advice. The crypto market is extremely volatile, including stocks as well. So you can lose your money really quickly. So make sure you do hardcore due diligence and your own research before you get into anything. Also, I do not have anything to sell you. I don't have any fancy Telegram or Discord or trading program. So please don't be tricked by any of the scammers. I'm just putting out my raw thoughts and my own research in terms of what I would do and things that I find educational. Now, full disclosure, I do hold Solana, I do hold ETH, I do hold BTC. I'm not a maxi by any standards. Yes, I've been posting a lot about the ETH DATs, but I'll start posting about Solana because at the end of the day, you don't know which chain will ultimately win out. I do believe that these are the three most popular and robust investments that I personally can take myself. Finally, for those of you who are using X, I'm also on X as well, so give me a follow. I can tweet out information a lot faster than I can make these videos. So if you enjoyed today's video, please give me a like and consider subscribing, and let's get on with it. And as a thank you, recently I traveled to Japan. It was my first time. For those of you coming from North America, there was a culture shock. This is a beautiful picture of Mount Fuji. It was very serene, calm, and this is how I approach all my investments. So I know I'm going to get this question, so let me get it out of the way right away. So why would you buy a DAT rather than Solana straight out? You only buy these digital asset treasury companies because you believe that for every dollar that you spend, you're going to accumulate more asset per share. So in this case, more Solana per share than you would on your own. And you believe in management, whether it's Tom Lee or somebody else like Michael Saylor managing it, you believe that management will be able to manage that money much better than you can. So like I mentioned earlier, Solana DATs are really heating up. It's up to 18 by now if you count Helius, the HSDT that I'm going to be talking about today. So let's backtrack and start off with why Solana. If you look at Solana fundamentals, today is not a technical day where we get into all the technical details of Solana versus other layer ones, but we want an overview, high-powered picture because there's a lot of videos on the technical stuff already. So let's talk about why Solana today from an investment point of view. So it's a high-performance L1 proof-of-stake blockchain. You can see that the transaction cost is fractions on a penny. It's really scalable because it's layer one, its base layer can execute a theoretical 65,000 transaction per second, TPS. Now, what's theoretical and practical are two different things. We'll take a look at the data for that. And then you could see that they've executed 449 billion transactions up to today, and there's a lot of developers that are coming in. So we could see that it's really fast because it's executing 3,500 TPS right now. That's the practical application, whereas its theoretical TPS is 65,000. Right over here, you could see less than 400 milliseconds finality. Now, if you think about that, it's like going into a store, swiping your Visa, your Amex, MasterCard, and waiting for that confirmation. That's what finality is. 400 milliseconds is really fast. Nobody wants to wait 2, 3, or 5 seconds for that. Right over here, you could see the chain is still growing. 7,500 new developers coming in 2024, about almost close to 4 million daily active wallets and 23 billion transactions executed to date for a year. Okay. 7% native staking. So they're earning a staking of 7%. And it's about a fraction of BTC, 5% of BTC's market cap, and about 1/5 of ETH. And then finally, it's being used by some of the major institutions, right? Like BlackRock, Franklin Templeton, and payment rails for PayPal and Stripe. So there's a lot of applications that are coming to Solana for it's really fast, it's cheap, it's accessible to the retail market. So here's some further data pointing that out. It's TPS 3,700. It's median fee for every transaction. You're paying a fraction of a cent for that, okay? And then average daily transaction, you could see that it's over 113 million transactions per day. In terms of its market cap and growth potential, you could see that SOL is roughly trading at 120 billion, whereas ETH is at 500 billion and BTC at 2.3 trillion. So SOL is really only 5% of BTC and about a fifth of ETH. So it does have a lot of room to grow as it continues to take market share. And we could take a look at the institutional holdings as of this year. Now, this data is a little bit out of date because you know the DATs have been buying, whether it's BTC, ETH, or the ones popping up for Solana. You could see all of the supply, right? BTC almost 20 million, ETH 120 million, Solana 606 million. Now, if you look down, Solana is really growing at a fraction of ETH and BTC. So I do believe that there is a lot of room. And then if you look at the ETP, just consider it as ETF holdings, you could see that Solana is a mile away of, ETH and then of BTC itself. So there is a lot of institutional, interest in Solana, and Solana ETFs are coming. So when are the ETFs coming? I'm glad that you asked. If you look at James's post right over here earlier this year in July, you could see that there's a lot of ETFs being filed. Grayscale, Bitwise, Franklin Templeton, Canary, a lot of people are filing. So we should expect the ETFs to be approved around October, and there's close to a 95% odds of the ETFs being approved for Solana. So you'll soon see, besides the DATs buying, you also see ETFs as well. And if we take a look at the RWA assets right over here, you can see that Solana is coming up to 500 million, putting it in the top 10 compared to its peers. And another big thing that I saw is that MetaMask is actually adding support for the first time, a non-EVM chain into its network. You could see that MetaMask, for those of you who don't know, it's basically our online wallet. It's our hot wallet that almost everybody has used being in crypto. It's got more than 140 million users and over 30 million monthly active users. So there's a lot of people who are using it. So by being able to bridge Solana onto MetaMask and adding support for it, you'll see a lot more activity that's going to be happening. So the next set of data showing how efficient Solana is compared to other chains like ETH, this comes from Invest Answer from James. So James is somebody who I follow online. His YouTube is great. He's a numbers guy. He goes over this and he's got a team working with him, and he does have access to a lot of research data that most people don't. So shout out to James for this. Before I go into the data, I want to give you a cautionary tale. He's also a Solana bull as well, so keep that in mind as we're looking at this data. So we take a look right over here, Solana versus ETH. In all categories that he's deemed very important, the Nakamoto coefficient is how decentralized a chain is. And you can see right over here, Solana, according to James, is almost 1,000 times more decentralized than ETH. I may debate this number, but today is not a day to go into it, okay? So in terms of block time, in terms of how fast things are, it's about 2,900%. In terms of finality time, it's almost 360,000%. In terms of max TPS right now, in terms of their calculation, what they're getting, they're showing almost a 1.5 million times faster, okay? Daily transaction, about almost 6,000 times in terms of numbers of transaction. Active users, daily active users, you could see right over here, about 654%. In terms of transaction per daily active users, roughly 700%. The average fee, because Solana is so cheap, it's fractions of a penny. You can see this number is almost 2.6 million times. In terms of efficiency, it's about 28,000 times. In terms of market cap per daily active user, you could see that Solana is outbeating ETH in almost every category. So this is the data that he presented, which I thought was extremely interesting. Now, remember that most of us don't have access to this data. So when you take a look at the numbers, that's what it says. Remember when I said that James is also a Solana bull as well? So sometimes you do have to take a look at information a little bit closer. The one thing that's not mentioned on here is why is institutions like Tom Lee says is choosing Ethereum over Solana. Yes, Solana is faster right now. There's no debating that. No one would ever debate that. But the one thing that he left out was in terms of uptime, okay? So Ethereum has never failed in the past 10 years. And I think that's why Wall Street, Tom Lee, and everybody else is gravitating towards it. If you look at the Solana outages over the past, let's just say 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024, the last time it was out was February of 2024. It's been out 6-7 times, major outages. And then in terms of minor stuff, you could see right over here, partial outages. So that's why a lot of the institutions so far, that's my thought on this, would not select Solana at this moment in time. because of these potential outages. So everybody knows about these problems. So keep that in mind when we're taking a look at Solana as well. So now that we got the fundamentals of Solana out of the way, let's jump into HSDT and take a look at the company's fundamentals, its numbers, its investors, and trying to derive a value from this. So HSDT is Helius Medical Technology. Previously, before their pivot to becoming a sole DAT, what they were in the business of neuromodulation. So they would ship these portable neuromodulation stimulators, that's what NMS stands for, before pivoting. So now that they pivoted, their main goal is to become a Solana Treasury. So they'll be acquiring Solana, staking Solana, trying to increase that Solana per share for you. So for every dollar that you spend on Solana, their goal is to be able to do it more efficiently than you can, therefore acquiring more Solana. So here's the official release on September 18th when they placed the $500 million pipe round that's led by Pantera and Summer Capital. So we're going to be going into this PR and some of their filings in detail. If we just take a quick scan at the investor list, you can see these are tier 1 investors who are involved in this pipe round. It's really led by Pantera Capital and Summer Capital, like I said. Remember that Pantera is one of the biggest VCs within this business, right? They also own BMNR as well. They're in those pipe rounds, and their biggest position is in Solana. They hold 1.1 billion of Solana under their assets under management. So remember that. So they have all of the incentives aligned to make sure that Solana does well. You can see Animoca Brands, who invests in all of the Web3, gaming, metaverse stuff. If you remember from last cycle, Animoca Brands is one of the biggest VCs within that space. Hashkey Capital is a big VC, and then you have a bunch of other VCs supporting them. So I do encourage you to go through this carefully and take a look for yourself. You could see that it's not just the 500 million pipe, but it actually goes up to $1.25 billion that's potential raise. Here's all the investor list like I talked about, and it's very important for you to go through and see how much they've raised, okay? So in this document right over here, it talks about not just the common shares, but it talks about the warrants and staple warrants. So we're going to dive into this deeply, looking at their SEC filings. So this way we get a clear understanding of what all the terms are and trying to make some sense and value out of what the company is worth today. So as you guys know, I really like looking at the numbers, taking a deep dive and letting the numbers guide me. So in getting the numbers and giving me a value that I would be comfortable at, I'm looking at these SEC filings. We talked about the pipe. So for those of you who are new, who don't recognize any of these things, I encourage you to go back to my BMNR series, part 1, part 2, part 3, where I talk about these things, okay? So the Form 8 is basically the company filing a major event. Today, we're going to talk about that a lot because a lot of this information is found under their Form 8K. I'm going to link it below in the link so that you can check and read it yourself. And then the 10Q, which are the quarterly updates. So these two are the main documents that I'm going to link below so that you can access yourself. And then the S1 and S3 basically allowing the company to declare that they're selling securities, stocks, bonds, etc. And then Schedule 13, as we talked about last time, are for big investors who are coming in greater than 5%. So here's the Form 8K. And like I said, I'm going to link it below, filed on September 15th. And you go down and just that first paragraph on the second page right over here, you can actually find all the numbers that you want. Them talking about cash purchases of common stock right over here at the value that they're going to execute it at, okay, at $6.88, okay? And then they talk about these stapled warrants as well. We're going to talk about the cash staple warrants versus the crypto staple warrants, okay? So we're going to talk about these. So some of these numbers so that you can recognize it when I go into my Excel of what they are, okay? There's 62,946,000 right over here, the staple warrants. And then you can go down and go through all of this document yourself. In terms of the gross proceeds, you remember from that pipe round, they said it was about $500 million. It turns out that it's $508 million when it's all said and done, okay? So these values can all be found within the SEC filings that you can take a look at yourself, and I highly encourage you to go through and verify your own information. Now, in terms of the funding, we can think about it clearly in two categories. The immediate funding, that $500 million or $508 million, that's the cash that they're going to get right away. And then the future, the staple part, okay, those staple warrants that are added to the original deal, that's the extra $750 million that they talked about in that PR release, giving them that value of the $1.25 billion of total funds that they can possibly raise. So let's jump into the Excel right over here. Remember how I broke it up into immediate and future? If we take a look at that 500 million pipe round, the immediate cash round, so they sold about 37 million common stock for cash, giving them $260 million at $6.88. So these are all 688. They sold pre-funded warrants for cash, 25 million of them, giving them 172 million in cash. And then they sold pre-funded warrants, right? Remember, one warrant is equal to one share of HSDT. About 11 million of them at this price, giving them that $75 million. So all of it adds up to the 508 million and 700,000. That's what we saw in the Form 8K. Now, remember, what are these cryptos? Okay, so it's either locked or unlocked sold that people were able to transfer that to in terms of being able to purchase these shares. So that's where we get the $508 million. And please remember this number of shares, 73.9 million shares that are immediately for this cash so that they can go out there and buy Solana with it. And then here's the future staple warrants. So these are executed in the future. You can notice right away, these were sold at $10.13. This is the 62,900,000 shares that we see, giving them a proceed of 637 million. Now, these staple crypto warrants right over here, again, you can pay for them with locked and unlocked sold. Notice that they sold them also at $10.13, about 11 million of them, giving them 111 million. Should they decide to execute this, should the investors decide to execute this in the future, this is where we add that extra $750 million, okay? Now, remember this right over here. It's also adding an additional 73.9 million share. So right now, the shares outstanding, I want you to keep these two in mind. To give us a full understanding of the total outstanding shares, we're going to take a look at this data right over here. Notice the pipe immediate, that gave us the 73.9 million shares. The future staple warrants, that gave us 73.9 million shares. What we haven't accounted for was what happened before it became a Solana Treasury company. Now you can file this in their 10Q, their last 10Q filings. You can find this data. It shows that there's roughly about 1 million shares that are out there. So if I take this and I add it to the 74 million shares, I should get 75 million shares that are outstanding immediately. So if I take that 75 million shares and I add it towards the 74 million shares right over here, I should get roughly 148, 149 million. Now, the last set of shares that were not posted, but if you dig into it, you could see that Pantera and Summer Capital, they're basically gifted base warrants. So you'd have to go through and do the calculation for this of about 7.4 million shares, and then a performance warrants that's tied to the staple shares. This is about 3.7. So if you add these two up, they're roughly 11 million additional shares. There is lockup periods for this, and we're going to talk about it. But if you total everything, grand finale, it's about 160 million total outstanding shares should everybody convert and fully dilute over. But for now, the immediate outstanding shares right away, it's roughly 75 million. So adding the immediate and the future together, we could see that this is the cash they raised, the 508.7 million, 750 million right over here. This is the total of 1.25 billion dollars, okay? And then if you add up all the units, we talked about this, it's roughly 160 million. If you take its fully diluted FDV share value, it's roughly around $7.90 a share if you fully dilute it out today. Now, one important thing when talking about all of those shares are the lockup dates, because that's a really critical factor. So what I was able to dig out, and please let me know if you found something different from that Form 8, okay, is that the closing date is September 18th. So that's a really important date to keep in mind. We know who the lead investors are. The immediate securities that are issued, we talked about this, right? The 74 million shares that are issued, plus the 1 million that was prior to this entire pipe making at 75 million. And then we talked about the future, the stapled or the dilution should everybody convert over. So the cash securities, the stuff that is traded for cash right away, there's a 50% locked up for 30 days after the resale registration is effective. Now, remember we talked about resale registration in the previous couple of videos. So go back and review that, okay? So all shares are locked until resale registration is effective, declared by the SEC. Now, for all the crypto stuff, okay, so that's the pre-funded warrants and the staple warrants, it's not exercisable until stockholder approval. Now, registration, the resale registration, when does the SEC determine that it's effective? Because that's a critical date. Well, they said they closed on the 18th. That's what we got from the data, right? So Helius or HSDT is to file within 30 days later. So within that window of time, they're supposed to file with the SEC, and then the SEC declares it as as it being registered. So I expect this somewhere between mid-October. They haven't announced it yet. I haven't seen it myself yet. So if you've seen it, let me know, but I haven't seen it in the data yet. So we expect somewhere in mid-October. Now, the advisory shares, remember how Pantera and Summer Capital got those strategic advisory shares plus also those bonus warrants as well? So those are actually locked up, okay? So the advisory shares right over here, so those are actually locked up for about 180 days post-closing. So if we say closing is September, we expect it around, February, March of next year. So that's when those advisory shares become unlocked. So when we're calculating a value, we want to keep those in mind. So as I was shooting this video, I only had access to the funds that they raised so far. Of course, something changed, which I'm going to talk about soon. But today, it closed at $16.02 right over here. I've broken this up into immediate and stapled, which are the future, okay, the staple warrants, so that it's easier for us to take a look at. So we said they raised $508 million, right? So that's the immediate cash raise. That's the same for the staple warrants. The future cash from warrants in the future, it's zero right now because they haven't exercised it yet. If they are to exercise it, that would be the $750 million additional funds that come in. So as of today, the total cash raise is $508 million. The future cash raise would be $1.25 billion. We talked about that. Right now, in terms of the post-pipe shares, we had that $74 million plus the $1 million before all of this pipe stuff. That's where I get that $75 million from. And then in terms of the future, if you add in the additional funding, which was the additional $73.9 million, plus the 11 million advisory shares, we talked about those advisory shares to Pantera and to Summer Capital, that's 11 million. This is where I get these numbers. So we dive down in terms of a price per share. If we take a look, so this is what the market is trading at. That's the market. This is what's on their books right now. If we take a look at the funds, the 508 million divided by the 75 million diluted shares as of today, what they have on their books, they should be worth $6.78 per share, okay? Now, the same thing with this side in terms of the future. If you take a look at the full funds, the 1.25 billion divided by the 160, you get the $7.86. Now, in terms of a multiple, this is not a true NAV and NAV calculation because this is based on their cash and not the SOL that they hold, the staking that they're going to do and everything else, okay? But I just want you to think about it as a multiplier. So if it's trading at 2x of its book value, you should get around $13.56. Notice the market is trading at $16, okay? A little bit higher than what their book value is. And if they traded at 3x, which they did earlier, we'll take a look at the price action in a moment, okay? It should be at $20. That was yesterday, okay? And the day before that, they actually traded up at $24. Now, remember that this is not a true NAV, MNAV value, okay? Because we haven't looked at the Solana yet. We're just looking at the cash that they bring in. Now, those of you may say, if you look at the implied multiple, which is the MNAV, if we just look at the book value of what they have today, at $16, they would be trading, compared to their book value of $6.78 at 2.36, okay? And then the same with this, trading at about 2x, okay? Now, I want you to think back to BMNR. For those of you who are following the BMNR or SBET story, remember the pipe investors for BMNR? They got in at $4.50. So let's say $5 if you round it up. At $40, the pipe investors were up 10x. For HSDT, right over here, this is their pipe round. Even at $16, the pipe people are only up $2.36, okay? Sorry, 2.36 in terms of the multiple. So that's what they're up. They're only up roughly 2.4x. Compare that to BMNR at $4.50, at $40, $45. That's a 10x out of the gate for the pipe investors, okay? So keep those numbers in mind when we're thinking about a value in terms of valuing this company and where you would be comfortable with getting in. So here's the stock trading as of recording on September 22nd. The market closed down 33.6% down. So HSDT took a hit. Now, of course, Bitcoin was taking a dump along with ETH, along with Solana, along with SUI, and all of the blue chips in crypto. So keep that in mind. But notice these treasuries, they're really volatile. For the people who are new to crypto, you're betting on crypto, you're investing on crypto. That's already a really volatile asset. Now, when you add on a treasury, which is a leveraged vehicle of that crypto, whatever asset it is, it could be ETH, it could be Solana, it could be SUI, whatever it is, it's extremely volatile. Okay. So they took a dump 33% down. They're trading at $16. Notice at the beginning of the day, it was trading above $20, $21. And if we go back to 5 days ago, you could see it touched up almost $25. So when you take a look at the value earlier on, when things are opaque, people don't really understand the value of treasury companies. That's why I always say in all of my videos, I always take a step back. I let the hype go through first, because as I'm trying to understand the information and do my own due diligence and research when I jump into these, Form 8s and 10Qs, I make sure that I understand the value, okay? And if we look back at a month ago, before they became a DAT right over here, this is when everything was setting off. On that Friday, before the announcements all came in, notice it shot all the way up, right? From $7 to $22 and then eventually at $25. So the hype up is a lot, but I make sure I take a step back. So we're here at today being down at $16.02. And then let's take a look at a value for our DAT. So here's where I would price it at the 508 million. That's the immediate draw in, the immediate cash in crypto that they pick up. Okay, so this is right away at the pipe, what they're getting. Remember that it's roughly 75 million shares, right? We said the value is roughly $6.80. If you look at the market price today, it's trading at $16, so it's right here. In terms of a multiple for it, you can think about it as being an MNAV or a multiple of their book value. We talked about this. At $16, $15, the pipe investors themselves are only up 2x versus, let's say, like BMNR at $45, the pipe investors are up 10x. And, no crazy real dump really happened. To everybody's fear, we went through the pipe and we survived it. But of course, that depends on management and Tom Lee executing strategy. Over here, you could see that as it gets into this range, it starts to become interesting, right? Now, it traded up all the way at $25, so people were pricing, and especially earlier on, almost a 4x based on book value of what they had. So as I was finishing the data and getting ready to record the video, HSDT comes out with this, okay? So I know before anybody comes at me and says that, oh, did you know that they actually make the purchase? Yes, I did. It's right at the end. So it's 760,000 SOs that they purchased. It's actually right over here in their announcement. They purchased 760,000 Solana at $231 per Solana. Okay, so they talked about this. But does it change our calculation at all? I think not. Okay, so why do I say that? Because the current pipe is roughly around $508 million. That's the money that they brought in, right, at 75 million shares. Even after their first purchase, they say they have roughly 335 million left of this cash right over here. And if you go through and you add up the value, you could see that they spent about 175 million on their Solana shares. So really, if you add them up, it's roughly 500 million. So it really doesn't change that NAV if you think about it as a NAV or an MNAV. I will be doing a future video on them as soon as they update us with more purchases, the outstanding shares and everything else, so that we can give them a proper valuation. But as of today, it really doesn't change our calculation because they're both going to work out to be roughly $500 million. So here's my own personal target zones if I'm thinking about getting into a Solana Treasury, especially HSDT, knowing now the full books and what they have on their books, okay? So this is just my own preference. You can go through, do the research, and do whatever you want. So I'm not telling anybody to buy right over here. I don't hold any HSDT positions yet. So this is what I would do if I'm taking a look at them closely, and I'm watching them closely because I do want some exposure to Solana Treasuries. So in terms of the immediate, that 75 million shares that's out there at $6.80, if you look at the market price, what they're trading for on the market, and if you look at their book, the multiple of their book, or their NAV versus their MNAV, okay, you can see that at $16, the pipe investors are only up roughly 2.2x. So I'm comfortable with that. The pipe investors are not up 10, 15, 20x, where they're going to dump on us for sure. As this thing slips below $15, and if it actually crossed into the $10, so today was a great drop on the price. If you haven't entered this yet, you're actually in a decent position. Because when it starts to trade between $10 and $15, let's say $12, the pipe investors are not even up 2x. on their investment yet. So even if we fully unlock when the resale registration is deemed effective by the SEC, you're actually at a very comfortable place knowing exactly what they had. So this is what I mean. So anytime they shoot above this, I'm just going to watch it. I don't care how much hype is out there. I don't care if I'm going to miss the investment. At some point, they will get to this as they accumulate Solana and execute on their strategy. And of course, if Solana rises, because remember all of these DATs, you have to believe in the underlining that you're holding, whether it's SOL, it's ETH, it's BTC. Without the underlining rising, the Solana DAT will not be rising, okay? So I'm very cautious when it hits $20, especially earlier on. But at $15, I start to become very interested because I know what I'm buying, okay? So my target price is, if it slips below $15 and if it gets into the $10, $12 range, I'm very comfortable with personally my own investments. You can take a look at the research and do whatever you like, but these are what the numbers are showing me. And lastly, why would you want to bet on Solana or a Solana DAT? Now, I talked about this last time. If you look at Bitcoin in its last 15 years, right? It's got a huge return, 140% return on an annual year growth. But if we want to take out all these outlier years, because it's very hard to tell earlier on, and we looked at the last 5-6 years, you could see that Bitcoin has returned roughly a 60% annualized return. Now, if you look at Solana in terms of its last 4 years of performance, if you look at the return, 2021 was a great year when it launched. Of course, 2022 was the Sam Bankman-Fried, SBF, FTX collapsed. That's where it lost its value. 2023, 2024, and then 2025. The year's not over yet. But if you look at the total returns of Solana over that period of time, you just held them and ignore all of this market noise that's going on, all this pump dump, market manipulation. You get too many people whispering in the market. You've actually made a lot of money on your Solana investment. And the CAGR is over 90%. That's why people are looking at the next, DAT, the next asset below Bitcoin and Ethereum. Okay, guys, that wraps it up for this Solana DAT video. I hope that you learned something from HSDT and you found value in this video. So if you did, remember to give it a like, consider subscribing, and I will see you guys next time.